Reimagining Retail, the intersection of marketing and media with Kevin Weiss. Welcome to Tap Into an Expert, the podcast where we sit down with industry experts and get answers on all questions that you should be asking. I'm your host, Eric Sheinkop, and on this episode, we have someone who's going to enlighten your views on the evolution of e-commerce and more specifically, retail media. Joining us today is Kevin Weiss. Kevin is the Vice President of Retail Media at Skai. Kevin, thank you for being here. Would you mind introducing yourself, a little bit about your background and how you got into the position that you hold now?
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm joining from Skai. I've been here 5 years. We are an omni-channel platform for commerce advertisers. We work with brands and agencies, some of the largest in the world. Over 2,000 enterprise brands work with us as they invest across Amazon, Walmart, Instacart, Google, Meta, all the world's leading publishers. And I found myself in the role that I'm in today, partly from my past life. I was a managing partner of an e-com agency out of Boulder, Colorado, a bootstrapped shop, and I ran the Amazon P&L, which was all things Amazon, helping brands sell products there. I was actually a customer of Skai, formerly Kenshu along the way. And when we sold the agency in 2020, I was lucky enough to hop on, and I've been working in the retail media and commerce parts of the business ever since.
So you're part of a very exciting area of the industry, both marketing, retail, advertising, everything is converging here. The overall retail media network market is projected to experience massive growth in the next 5 years. Expectations that will surpass $231 billion by 2030, according to Criteo. So the rapid expansion, it underscores the shifting dynamics in marketing coming together with e-commerce. Along with this rapid growth, video has been emerging as a critical component in the retail media landscape. 84% of consumers report being persuaded to buy a product after watching a video, according to a study that Wakefield Research that we commissioned here at the Desire Company. And that statistic really emphasizes the power of visual content in influencing consumer behavior and driving sales. Retail media networks, they've obviously been expanding beyond traditional digital platforms, I'm sure where you first started in the industry, and now in-store media becoming increasingly important. And according to a report by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Walmart has ramped up its in-store media presence using approximately 170,000 digital screens across its 4,700 stores. And this expansion demonstrates the evolving nature of retail media, its ability to reach consumers in various touch points throughout their shopping journey. It's all coming together. So first question, Kevin. It's clear video helps drive conversions. So how must brands and retailers adapt their strategies to incorporate video in their retail media mix?
Well, taking advantage of all of the new offerings that retailers offer and the retail media networks offer, while you still have a chance for an early mover advantage. Any of this type of content, you can try to repurpose existing content or use some of the newer Gen AI creative tools if creation and building up that collateral is your current bottleneck. But in some cases, it's just educating the organization about that opportunity when it's a new media. Consumers are, not sure whether to really latch on and pay attention, or if they're going to start to get familiar with that and kind of have that same ad fatigue where they're accustomed to seeing that and recognizing it as an advertisement. But this content, I think from earliest iterations of video in search from Amazon, closed beta many years back, was a really powerful driver, not just for engagement, but also bottom funnel conversion KPIs like ROAS. So with that potential that you have, high engagement and high ROAS, you've got to be in on these types of placements, on this type of opportunity, and finding whatever your bottleneck is and powering through it because of that opportunity, particularly early in the equation. I'd also be remiss if I didn't say that, it really depends on your retailers that are important. So where do you have distribution? And, for many CPG brand manufacturers or the agencies supporting them, Walmart is the number one retailer. And with the acquisition of Vizio and the growth of their video inventory, I think that's going to show up differently for those brands, whereas others that have Amazon as their number one retailer, perhaps in beauty or toys or other categories, baby perhaps, you're going to be able to have a lot more digital offerings, digital first experiences with, the growing owned and operated network. So everybody's going to have video as part of that strategy. So if you've been slow to adopt, slow to embrace, make sure that you're jumping full body and don't just dip a toe in the water with it.
Sure. It's so interesting what you said. You touched on a number of things, and absolutely, like Walmart is leading with the scale, but almost every retailer that I've been speaking to, they're launching screens, at least in pilots, a couple hundred stores here, but multiple screens throughout that shopper journey within the retail environment. But you said something that's really interesting, that if a brand just wants to get started, repurpose content that they've otherwise used in other areas. And it's very interesting that you say that, because I talk to brands about thinking about it as, when social media came out, they were like, well, we'll just repurpose our traditional advertising content and we'll just repurpose our television commercial. And it's like, well, no, you can't do that, because that's not the experience that people are there for on social. And when somebody goes to a website, a retailer's website, I should say, and looking at a product, and there's all types of social content, I feel that it's not the right messaging for the right time, because that content should be lower fold, but you still see it as being able to be at least a starting place or a foot in the door. And are there other places beyond the product page that you would recommend using that type of content that you're repurposing from other initiatives?
Yeah, certainly. It's a good call out. I think there's, good, better, best, right? So let's say that repurposing existing content is the good. I think doing nothing is worst outcome. And if you're waiting until you have the resources, or, you go through the creative cycles to make the perfect content, or, the perfect time and place, I think you're going to be missing that early mover advantage, when in some cases, I think it boils down to like consumer psychology, which is that if a certain thing is in a certain place at eye level, they're going to buy it. And maybe it's like this brand or this brand, and there's these different factors that they take into consideration when they buy, some of them conscious, some conscious. But ultimately, you're just trying to get that right placement early to gain a foothold. Maybe you gain learnings that it doesn't work. Maybe you find that it does, but with all types of content, right, they're going to evolve. Even where we see now more user-generated content and sort of the authenticity play, that resonating with a lot of consumers, that it doesn't have to be overly produced content or something, perfect, that it's going to take repetitions one way or the other. So that's kind of how I do it. And that's coming from, some of my background, where I worked with more like emerging and SMB type brands before being at Skai, where I get to work with a lot of mid-market and enterprise. Like, their brand managers aren't going to accept, repurposing content, or in some cases, sure, the specs, the requirements are going to prohibit it. But, get started, whatever you have to do if you're not in the game. And I think that the barriers to entry are lowering with the likes of sponsored TV, and then some of the retailers with managed service on these activations, where you don't have to feel like you're doing the heavy lifting. And so those are some of the things that kind of stand out for me as folks are thinking through it. But it's a good call out for sure.
No, and you're absolutely right. It is all about the capacity of that brand to work inside that retail environment. So the retailers who have created partnerships for managed services along video, it allows a lot more brands to participate with new content that's right for that specific point in that journey. So I think that's right. Excellent too. And speaking of the different touch points, how have you seen video within the retail space specifically evolve during your time in the industry?
Well, I think I mentioned it before, that video in search, which we now often refer to as like sponsored brand video or sponsored video, used to think of video as, at least in terms of paid media, as something that was like a bigger buy, bigger commit, bigger production, budgets for it, and not everybody could do it. But I think Amazon in particular really wielded the marketplace that they have, and the desire to win the search results page and win the bestseller badges, to say, video can work really well for, bottom funnel advertisers with bottom funnel objectives. And so now we're seeing this convergence of, I think, shoppable media, where, brands are getting closer to consumers than they've ever gotten before. They're building out, first party data, and they're building these touch points with consumers where they can actually create a shoppable moment, or capture a moment when a consumer is ready to transact in ways that they haven't. So I've definitely seen it evolve from something that's generally considered upper funnel to something that's right there within like mid funnel and bottom funnel tactics. and even a great driver for retargeting, where you can get really precise with the targeting, at least with like the pure play retailers like Amazon, who have the targeting capabilities and the data clean room, democratized out there, where you can see that path of conversion. You can see how effective it is at actually capturing conversion or kind of using it for wherever you want in the funnel.
Sure.
So that's been pretty fascinating to watch. Yeah, I
Absolutely.
wouldn't have predicted that. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you think that brands are really embracing all the different touch points they now and utilizing them to their advantage? Or do you think it's a little overwhelming where, they're taking that digital experience, they're looking at the screens in store in all these different aisles in the store? Have you seen people who are really mapping out the right content for the right time? Or are we not quite there yet where it's just another place to hit them with a message?
Yeah, I'd say it's more the latter. Like they haven't gotten to that point yet where they're doing like storyboarding, and they can run different split tests of those journeys to say, we're going to, isolate these audiences. We're going to show them this version. We're going to isolate these audiences, show them this version, and stair step it through where they're taking advantage of some of the capabilities. So talk about, Amazon Marketing Cloud, because I think it's the furthest along as a marketing cloud, right? As a marketing data clean room, where you can exclude audiences from buys, not just with DSP buys, but also sponsored ads. So you can actually storyboard and you can drive consumers through the funnel very deliberately if the funnel, still has a linear element to it, even as it's compressing. But it's hard to do because the economies of scale of it all. And a lot of times with the bigger organizations who have a portfolio of brands where they're trying to do cross-selling and build the overall portfolio, or they've got product assortments in retail where you can go from sort of an entry SKU to the trade up, sort of the premium SKUs in a catalog. They have some of the pieces there, but they haven't had the cycles or they haven't had the SQL skills, or there's been limitations in data privacy from the clean room. So nobody's really there yet,
Right.
but the excitement and I think enthusiasm in the industry that this is possible today, and now it's a matter of acting on it.
Yeah.
I certainly feel every single day like there is urgency to show what's possible, use the tools that you have. And in that sense, I very much think that we will get there. And it's probably going to be a challenger brand that is, not tiny, like they've already established like a product market fit. They've got some smart, motivated folks on the team. It's probably not going to be like a super startup, like some of the, resellers or like challenger brands that were just trying to go and skim the market and acquire. And it's not going to be a big brand. It's going to be one of those like SMBs that can put it all together more quickly, cut through or eliminate the red tape. That's probably who's going to figure it out. We're going to be looking at those case studies in Unbox later this year.
That's very cool. Yeah. And it's also people who have to understand all the new opportunities that are there, which is typically going to be a younger challenger brand, to your point.
Yep.
And that, next section, I wanted to talk about the evolution of retail media. They're expanding their ad types beyond traditional display, a variety of very engaging, in-depth formats. The diversification allows these brands to create really immersive, interactive experiences for the shoppers. And, as we mentioned earlier, the rise of in-store screens, but also audio ads in physical retail spaces, that's really taking off. And it does enhance, or at least it's meant to enhance the shopping experience, provide new advertising opportunities at the same time. So the integration of digital technology and brick and mortar, it really demonstrates the convergence of what you were talking about, of the online, the offline experiences coming together. And, additionally, retail media networks, they extend their reach offsite onto social media and other digital platforms as well. Over 20 billion in offsite programmatic spend predicted for last year, 2024, which we'll get the final numbers on shortly, according to advertiser perception. So it just allows brands to reach consumers multiple touch points in their digital journey, in their physical journey at the right point with the right message, which is what retail media is all about. So how have you seen brands leveraging the new ad forms in retail media that continue to pop up? And it does feel like there's a new offering regularly. How quickly are they being embraced? And what type of percentage do you think brands are ready to embrace?
Some great questions packed in there. And I think, this evolution of retail media, it's a lot of convergences, right? You alluded to some shopper marketing, talking about video. We're generally talking about awareness buys, national media. And so I just think it's got all of these components wrapped up. And because of the rise of what a lot of folks would more conventionally referred to as retail media, like a sponsored ad or something like that, sponsored products, for example, we are seeing this proliferation. And each retailer is trying to take some of its DNA, the stuff that makes them special and not just another place where you buy a widget, but they're trying to take that into their RMNs. And concurrently with that rapid proliferation of retail media networks, they stood up their stacks really fast. And so a lot of them are replatforming. I think rehousing is a word that could characterize some of, the evolutions. If you look at like Parker Roundel, for example, working with Criteo, working with Citrus, now Epsilon, going in-house Roundel Media Studio. Like sometimes it's those changes that are happening within like the inner machinations of like the product owners and the leaderships within the RMNs that will actually manifest in a change in the ad formats or targeting capabilities of a certain ad type where, sure, it's been a sponsored product on target.com for many years now, but the nature of that targeting, the controls you get, the attribution that you get out of that, all of that has changed. So who's to say that that's like still technically the same ad type? So I think there's a lot of subtlety to this topic of how it's evolved, to get to kind of the question of like, are brands adopting it? How are they adopting? Are they able to keep up? I think it's that convergence where you get a lot of different flavors. At Skai, we have the privilege of working with a lot of different types of clients. About half the business is agency, which we kind of characterize as agency. About half of it is brand. And some of those agencies are like independent agencies, come from shopper marketing. Others are independent agencies that come from maybe a more like digital marketing background, like acquisition marketing type stuff. Others are holding companies where it's full service and they've got huge dollars flowing through on national buys. So all these different flavors. And then same thing with brands, where sometimes the marketing rolls up through the sales org. Other times it's this kind of new commerce business unit, or more classically rolling up through a CMO, and they handle all the paid media. So all these different ways that it shows up. And at the end of the day, when you boil it down, brands are in some cases living in a pay-to-play ecosystem with the retailers, where the retailers can kind of like twist their arm or use the leverage of a JVP to get those investments for that media. Sometimes it's managed, sometimes it's self-service, or sometimes it's self-service, but it's being done in a way that can satisfy the JVP requirements, vendor income type thing. There's all these ways that you get to it, but at the end of the day, the brands are trying to outperform their baselines. They're trying to protect and grow their contribution margin, and they're scrutinizing when retailers or the RMNs grade their own homework. And so I think sponsored products are by far the easiest to adopt. And if you just look at like where you have the choice to spend, which I think sponsored product, like self-service capabilities, wide adoption across as many retailers as a brand has meaningful distribution, where some of the other ad types, those RMNs are competing for dollars against other publishers or other retailers where they have baselines for that. They have existing like commits that are hard to move away. And sometimes they're happening off cycle where it's slower to adopt. And I think with the number of retail media networks that we work with at Skai, the number of clients that we have, I think it's going to be tough. Like 2025 is going to be a tricky year for some of the growth goals that retail media networks have, because brands, they're going to have trouble justifying, rationalizing going full funnel with every single retailer, given the inherent overlap and some of the targeting and, the ability to get data out quickly that shows incrementality. I think that's really what we're going to see. So hopefully that makes sense. Covered a lot of ground there, but that's
absolutely. And I think what's, something else that you touched on is like when you say a lot of brands feel like they're having their arm twisted to have to participate, and the justification from the retailers, like, but look, we have the first party data. We're going to get the right message to the right person at the right time, and your conversions are going to go up. Your baselines are, all of that. The question is that applicable to all the different areas that retail media is now playing? Like, for instance, brands used to go to their creative agencies for video. Now we partner, the Desire Company, we partner with retail media networks to be a managed service for video creation for retail environments, in-store, offline. But when you talk about first-person data, how far can video go? Like, what role does consumer privacy concerns really come in when creating video in retail media, which is all about the first-person data? Because if I get a coupon and it says Hey, we noticed you haven't bought meat in 5 years. You might want to get some iron vitamins. Like, cool, fine. I get a coupon for iron. But if I'm walking down the aisle at Target and all of a sudden there's a video that says, "Hey, Eric, you need iron. You're pretty weak." Like, I don't feel good about that necessarily. What role does that start to play in the creation of video?
Well, I have a memory of Minority Report and, that kind of ad, you need new jeans or something like that. But until I think we have like some kind of AR, VR, audio, video device like glasses, it's going to be hard to do the personalization. But more practically speaking, with targeting and with video personalization, right, use of first party data, a lot of times the costs outweigh the benefits. So the CPMs go up so high on some of this media when you're doing it with such a precise, targeting, that it's actually for the brands who are seriously entertaining that, the ones with JVPs, the ones who have that level of support as a supplier or as a vendor, they're already reaching those same consumers with cheaper CPMs through other, major DSPs, other CTV players. And so it's a tougher sell when the retailer can't twist the arm or isn't managing themselves, where they kind of get like the co-op funding or like the big slush fund budget, if you will, to go and deploy that how they want. It's really hard to get an advertiser over the hump of the increased CPMs with that targeting. So I think today we're not there yet. Some of that's hardware, some of that's privacy, some of that is the immaturity of the retail media network, where the stuff isn't easy. And a lot of the brick and mortar retailers, are still newer in their loyalty journeys, much less the kind of digital first things that you can do if you're a pure play retailer, like a Chewy or like an Amazon or like an Instacart, which arguably has a good shot at threading that needle as they approach how to address this.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Obviously video is much more effective at explaining what a product is, who it's right for, how to use it, the results that you could expect. So it drives higher conversions compared to static ads. The question is measurement, right? And it's exactly what you were talking about. At Target, 75% of guests report using their app or website while they're shopping in store, going up to 90% for Gen Zs. And that's according to Sarah Travis, SVP president at Rondell. So it highlights the importance of integrating that digital content into the in-store shopping experience, but it's either a liability or an incredible asset. And it's really the only thing that differentiates that is measurement. How can brands measure the effectiveness of their video campaigns in the retail environment or in retail media networks?
Well, we're seeing a lot of transformation of, brick and mortar experience. I think there's a lot of retailers that have a vision for it. They're going through that transformation, retrofitting stores and such. I think for measurement, particularly the retail media networks, a lot of them are using different plumbing in their network that they don't necessarily have the data in a way where they can expose it like a data clean room, or like for folks coming from digital, like multi-touch attribution. I think that the retailer data clean room is effectively the multi-touch attribution within the retailer walled garden, whether that be experiences in the open web or within a physical store. It's the customer that technically the retailer owns, right? They can identify that this is, John Smith, Jane Doe. They understand that they've served a video ad to this person or had app usage within store, but to be able to anonymize that and expose that to the advertiser with the level of confidence that the advertiser needs to go and get more budgets, they're not there yet. A lot of it still boils down to trust us, it's working, or yes, this is how it's being targeted. That evolution of the market as folks catch up and they can see the impact from comparable types of buys that perhaps, an Amazon Marketing Cloud or a Scintilla, formerly Illuminate, other retailer data clean rooms can kind of show. And then the advertiser can say, oh, well, it worked like this for that retailer, so we have good sense that it's going to perform similarly for this one. But I really don't think that we're there yet from a measurement lens. And we're seeing, all different angles of trying to get to that of like, what's really incremental? What can we really scale from, top level of like the MMM to the retailer saying, here's what's happening, to, an agency running an analysis or doing like, different ad hoc reports from experts, consultants and such. So a lot of different approaches to this, but I don't think the retail media networks are really there yet at large, but we're starting to see flavors of it, that it's emerging. And also I think the important thing is like for brands or the advertisers to say, here's what I need from you, retailer or retail media network. Here's what I need from you in terms of data to go and tell the story internally that I should be moving these budgets to your full funnel buys or your new in-store activation that I can do with you. This is the data that I need. I think that's percolating and we're starting to see some headway.
So you just touched on all of this, but can you go a little deeper into how the data clean rooms are really revolutionizing the way that retailers and brands collaborate within the retail media networks? What benefits are they offering in terms of data security as well as that campaign effectiveness?
I think where I'm coming from is I've spent a lot of time in AMC and I've done hands-on work with clients. Fortunate to have several functional teams at Skai and also a whole R&D group, right? We're about 600 employees. So there's a lot of folks that are working on this as well. Also, Luminate, Scintilla through Walmart. I think that's really evolved from like a shopper cloud to a marketing cloud. Had interaction with other retailers on their up and coming data clean rooms and some of the alphas and betas that are happening. So a lot of it's coming from Amazon, Walmart, but seeing the other retailers, Kroger in particular, I think is made some great headway. I think Home Depot and Instacart and others are making good progress too. But what it's doing is it's democratizing the data in a way that brands and their agencies have had to rely on relationships and ad hoc reporting from the retailer to get historically. So access to data, access to information about the end consumer, about the customer journey that they just didn't have before in a recurring way that they could sort of bank on and build marketing plans and marketing campaigns and tactics around. That's a big revolution, I think, in the space. The second piece would be targeting, right? And that's where there's a difference between a shopper cloud, where you can understand shopper behavior, particularly in store, versus a marketing cloud that has more, targeting, audience exclusion capabilities, and the like that we've seen more from Amazon Marketing Cloud, where you can take a keyword targeted campaign, but make a bid adjustment based on whether that audience has or hasn't landed on a product detail page or has or hasn't added to cart. And that type of adjustment can be very, very tactical to get, 20, 30, 50% better return on that investment from that buy with that sort of behavioral targeting layered on to a keyword or intent type of targeting. That's, I think, a revolution as well, where, classic paid search of like a Google, a Bing, et cetera, that has been behavioral and I would say like programmatic targeting for a while. Retail media sponsored products have been basic, very remedial in terms of the targeting even. So those are kind of the two big revolutions. And I think everybody's staying tuned for, once again, how does the retailer take their identity and bring that to bear through a retailer data clean room where, Home Depot in a home improvement category, or a Lowe's, right, that they're going to have a very different flavor of a retailer data clean room than an Instacart, which is going to be grocery, versus those different lines that they generally sell. So versus a Best Buy as well, where it's a different type of purchase cycle and different privacy challenges depending on the frequency of those purchases. And so really fascinating to see that play out. But those are kind of the two core ones that I've observed.
Yeah. And so you were talking about like the adjustments of a search word and if they land on the product page or not. Data clean rooms, do they expand off-site channels like CTV? Is it enabling more sophisticated cross-channel targeting and measurement?
Yeah. So for example, like AMC audiences and Scintilla like audiences, those can be layered onto a buy or essentially used as a targeting mechanism that allows for an advertiser to make a big bet to say, yes, I will give you the money, retail media network, to go and do this activation that normally I wouldn't because you're giving me the targeting to justify, to rationalize it, because this is exactly who I want to reach. And I've got a lot of budget if you can deliver it. So I think that's major. And that's where, kind of like I was alluding to, I think a lot of the other, tier 2 retail media networks, because they don't have the marketplace and they don't have an AWS, asset in the portfolio, or they don't have the owned and operated inventory, it's going to be a lot harder for them to do the things that an Amazon or a Walmart could do. So it's going to be hard for them to give the data to the advertisers that they need to rationalize the investment that the retailers ask them to make in full funnel. That's, I think, a really important challenge that I'm not sure how the retailers will overcome it unless they can truly use the leverage through JVP. And when that happens and it's a managed service, like it muddies the waters a little bit on how the RMN is declaring growth, and can they
Sure.
sustain those investments? That's to be determined.
Interesting. Do you think that anything with these data clean rooms and protecting customer data, is that leading to any of this, the fraud rates going down within retail media networks? Like Double Verify put out a report saying retail media networks are showing fraud rates 31% lower than the overall fraud benchmark and suitability violations 10% lower than the overall benchmarks. So they're saying the statistics demonstrate the effectiveness and safety of retail media networks for advertisers. Are those coupled together?
Yeah, I think that's bona fide. Part of it may be like sampling bias, where I don't think a lot of retail media networks are getting these, huge full funnel buys.
Yeah.
Obviously, they are, and many suppliers and vendors are investing heavily in these types of activations. But I think the nature of a retail media network, you're essentially buying through a walled garden. So even if they're reaching consumers in the open web, you're investing through a walled garden. There's a big difference between saying, I want to spend money with a walled garden and then let them kind of extend and append that data to the open web, versus going to a more classically open web solution, regardless of the ID, regardless of like the CDPs, DMPs involved that are trying to extend cookies. I just think there's a big difference there. So I'm not surprised by those stats. That disparity will diminish as RMNs get some more of those dollars, and they have to like essentially buy the same audience data as they're trying to get incremental reach. But at least for now, foreseeable, I wouldn't be surprised if those numbers hold for at least a little bit here, while we're effectively seeing a walled garden be the one that's executing the targeting and using their first party data to guide the buy.
That's good news. It's good news for everybody. So you hear a lot of whispers. I'm sure you get a lot of sneak peeks of what's coming. What technologies do you think will have the biggest impact in retail media in the coming year to the 2 years?
I think the biggest one is, I don't know if it's going to be performance plus, but it's going to be more of that publisher bidding type solution, which I think early iterations, for Google, it's like a smart bidding. We're seeing a more mature black box with Performance Max. Instacart has already got a really good set of proof points that optimize bidding, which is their publisher bidding capability. It's basically goal-based bidding. That works better for most advertisers for most of the budget than any of the other kind of tips, tricks, tools of the trade. And I think we're seeing the same for Amazon emerge, coming more from the DSP side. But I think what's going to happen is, with the complexity and the convergence that we were alluding to before, where you have this more digital marketing, like shopper marketing, you have national buys that's like in-store, it's sponsored ads, it's off-site display, it's on-site display, it's all this different stuff. You really need AI and publisher bidding to do some of that thinking for you. So we're going to see more like modeled conversions, more black box, where some of the controls and the dials and levers that marketers have had access to through an Amazon ads or through a Walmart Connect, those are going to start peeling back. And it may be this kind of subtle jujitsu where you're getting more and more data, more and more controls, like I was just alluding to, where I can bid up based on an Amazon Marketing Cloud audience in my sponsored product or sponsored brand or sponsored display campaign. Eventually, that's going to be displaced by a superior performant type of publisher bidding black box. And that's going to be a radical paradigm shift, as a lot of the folks who have sort of made their bread on, being an expert of how to, beat the competition with setting those dials and levers correctly, or reading the data and using some of the early access they had. That's going to be a big shift that we saw, from Google and with, Meta, things like Advantage Plus, where there's going to be more of that black box. So I think that's the big one that's coming. I know a lot of the retailers already have some of that sort of auto targeting, but I think it's just going to be heightened as the number of placements and the proliferation of generative AI for creation, as all of that continues to scale. That's going to be the big one that's going to catch some folks off guard.
Sure. So interesting. And I know that a lot of the less sophisticated brands are already overwhelmed, and they're like, hey, I just want to sell my product at Target. I just want to sell it at Walmart. And now I'm jumping through all of these hoops. But do you have any advice to them? What can they do to stay ahead of the curve in what's coming in retail media?
People first, right? And
Yeah.
it's the people that you have working on the business, working in the business, that are going to make the difference. Sometimes that's the people within. A lot of times it's actually partners, right? Externally. I spent a lot of time on the topic of incrementality in the past couple of years. And I was actually surprised at how many different partners brands were bringing in to help solve their most complex challenges.
Mm.
And so, right, if you can't source the people within or you need fractional resources, you can get that externally through a variety of partners that are going to bring their experiences, their technology to bear. And at the end of the day, it's talent, it's that ingenuity, probably a little bit of luck too. But yeah, really focus on the talent that you have across the board and don't settle for anything less than the best. And like I said, if it's hard to get it internally, go and source it. There's a whole host of different folks out there that are super sharp, have some been there, done that experience, and can parlay what they've done for perhaps a big brand or a different work in a different category to your category or to your brand that can help you make that jump and get that edge.
Right on. And you started the podcast with this, but as the final question before Experts Corner, do you have any advice for marketers looking to really excel in video-based retail media? Anything video-based that they could do? I know you said just start somewhere. What's the next step?
Good question. I think, from targeting to measurement to creation, I think test and learn approach really does stay true for me. I think that's something particularly for folks who kind of got their teeth in retail media, through Amazon, we've just sort of all embraced and internalized. And you've got to follow some more innovative technologies that are coming out that are making sense of this. So from the measurement side, from targeting, to creation, just keep tinkering, keep learning, join communities, go to conferences and try to learn from some folks who are coming from a different discipline than perhaps you have. And you'll find, I think, some synergies with that.
This is awesome. Well, thank you very much. We are now going into my favorite section, Experts Corner, conclusion questions. So feel free to make these one-word answers or expand. What's a strategy everyone's following, but no one is questioning?
Brand defense. So spending a considerable, or let's call it at least double-digit percentage of your retail media budget on sponsored ads for brand defense. I'm sure there are some people out there that they're like, hey, I'm questioning that. But I think more generally speaking, most folks are following this, but they're not questioning whether the high purchase intent experience of a retail media search environment is actually worth that investment and why you wouldn't want to put that towards some of those upper funnel, those full funnel investments or newer media, newer activations that you can get early mover advantage on. I think that's the one that I'm still kind of surprised there's such this adherence to that strategy.
Yeah, I haven't heard that before. No one's brought that up, and that's such a good point. I love that. What's a trend you think will be on the decline or dead within the next year?
Measurement standardization. And I think it's a noble cause, but you've got too many large retail media networks that don't need to play by those rules, and you have too much competition to stay ahead. So I think this group of folks that are rooting for measurement standardization, I think that trend, we're going to see that taper off a bit. It's just too much of an uphill battle, too much of a slog. At least it's not going to die entirely, but it certainly won't be in a top 5 or top 10, trends if you're searching or seeing the reports from the different publishers. Yeah.
Well, you might have just answered the next question, but what's one thing that everyone in your industry is afraid to admit?
Yeah, I thought about this one a bit. I think it's the level of burnout. Not from like everybody, because a lot of people are excited and they're like trying to join this movement, this wave of, retail media, commerce media. But the folks who are really good at what they do, they've been hearing, year after year, we're going to double down on retail media. We're going to double down on commerce. We've been doing this for like 10 years and we're already like 100 downed in on this. So I think a lot of the talent that I've seen, like that I've worked with personally, they have, been reinventing and kind of taking some of that experience and doing something else or trying to get off the hamster wheel of managing campaigns or being in the weeds with everything because it's a lot of work. Amazon moves really fast. Retail media moves really fast. So I think I'll go with burnout on that one. Most folks have it at some level. It's just like a layer deep that you may not get when you're sort of chatting by the happy hour or at the professional event, but it's there.
Sure. Yeah. So what's the most controversial opinion that you hold?
I have a couple. I don't know if I'm going to shock the world, but I think professionally, this notion that you can train somebody to be a SME in retail media if they haven't already been in the space, meaning like they're just getting started now or like within the last year or so, that you can kind of get them up to the level of like, go put them on stage or they're going to get, cited in some kind of news article or whatever, that's like possible within a realistic amount of time. Because I just think the cycles that people have spent in this space, it's just going to be hard for anybody to catch up, and it's only going to just keep accelerating. So I think that's a controversial one where some folks are like, no, we can do this, we can ramp up in it. I think it's really tough. There's just so many layers here and so many movers and shakers in the space that it's a lot to keep up with. Yeah, that's kind of the one that I have right now. I've got others, but I think that's one where I'm getting some disagreement from folks I talk with.
As well said, it takes 10 years to become an expert in the craft. So I hear you. So as we wrap today's episode, obviously you've provided a lot of valuable insights into the complex, exciting world of e-commerce and retail media networks. Final thoughts you'd like to share with our audience about the future of this space?
Well, I've definitely touched on several key themes. Generative AI for creation, particularly of video and creative content. I think that's what I talked about. But one thing that I haven't talked about yet is generative AI for analysis. Going through data, disparate data sets, understanding relationships, what's causal, what's correlative, as folks try to answer for incrementality. I think we haven't really seen generative AI for analysis make its way where you can sort of be blown away from a first interaction of like the stuff that you could get with ChatGPT when it was sort of like a novelty of like writing a script for like a Seinfeld episode or something. You're like, first try, nailed it. We haven't seen that yet for the types of analysis or insights that tend to be impactful. And I think when that happens, where Gen AI catches up in its ability to analyze data, not have a hallucination and make some sense of stuff, and guide, through this kind of agentic experience here where you can talk to an agent, have it analyze data and provide a meaningful recommendation that you can bank on. That's going to be a big paradigm shift for folks who have been spending a lot of their time making sense of that data and coming up with an opinion or an insight. And I think that's going to be a challenge for a lot of the service providers in the space. It's going to increase the amount of noise. So generative AI for analysis, that's one that, changes are coming. I think it's going to be good because it'll get us out of some of the rote repetitive work that we all do to some extent. But that's a big one that we haven't really seen kind of make its way over the hill and start rolling downhill. So keeping an eye on that, various tools out there from not just SaaS providers like ourselves, but also the retailers, whether it's a Rufus or other solutions. So that's one I'm keeping a close eye on.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much for being here with us today, providing invaluable insights. I know you contribute to the entire retail media landscape, and we are grateful for your time. So if you want to connect with Kevin, he is on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Weiss Kevin, WEISSKEVIN, and check out the organization Skai at skai.io. So thank you guys very much for listening today to Tap Into an Expert, where we tap into the experts for you. And if you want to learn more, visit thedesirecompany.com.